But at the same time, like it just feels like because the power dynamic is changing from within the system, then the necessity of seizing the means of production doesn't feel as urgent, because we found a different way to change the power dynamic. And if the power dynamic is sort of what was wrong with the owners of the means of production, leading to inequality, leading to hierarchies, leading to, potentially we got different problems down the track in terms of a new type of meritocracy, a new type of hierarchy, a new type of inequality that develops. I'm not blind to those issues either, but at least we found a way to get there from within the system. And I'm not against changing the system either. I've been using the AI systems to redesign the system. I've gone into a lot of detail with this. So, but
can I just clarify then for you? This might be of assistance, I think, at this stage of the conversation, that the consequence of the development of human civilization has meant that those who own the means of production are generally the ruling class. And so that is like a causality kind of situation there. I don't think that is like written in stone, but like if you look at human history, those people that have kind of controlled that stuff, so the capitalist class has controlled the things that produce all the value that everyone lives off, and so they generally run society. They are like generally the people that have the money to buy the politicians and change, like rewrite the laws and make the policy decisions go in their interests and all that sort of stuff. And so like while it's not everything that happens in that system, you can have a lot of popular, uprisings and people getting together and voting and using their power as a collective and voting in their own interests, and then they can get policies and legislation changed in their own interest. But generally, the people that own the means of production have the resources to control the system. So like it would be way more overt in like, the ancient times where you had like an emperor or someone, they had extreme and like absolute control. In like feudal times, you had a king that basically had the divine right of king, so they pretty much had control over everything, and the church did too. And now, like as a class, which is not a unified class, might I add, the capitalist class kind of has the means, because of the control that they have over the means of production, to kind of make society run in their interests. Now, what we're talking about here is not hierarchy when it comes to owning the means of production. What we're talking about is why people control the means of production in this society. And like, let's say a food manufacturer, or someone that manufactures food, or someone that grows food. So an industrial capitalist or an agriculturalist. Now, like, they produce a lot of food because of the technology, so they probably don't employ a lot of laborers like they used to, so they don't have like a massive control over the working class like they did back in the day. But like, what is the problem with that system is they own the means of production, so they control the means of producing food to profit off it, not to make food. And so like, that's an important distinction and a realization to make, that in this system, this mode of production that is capitalistic, people make food for profit, not because people need to eat food. And like, that is a massive problem in our society. Like we've discussed on this podcast, I'm pretty sure that like in 2020, America threw out $218 billion, $218 billion worth of food. So they must have produced way more than that, but they still threw out $218 billion worth of food. And if you wanted to solve hunger in America, you can do that with about $20 billion. So like 10 times, you could, like, with the amount of food they threw out in 2020, you could solve hunger in America 10 times over. And so when you have a system where the people that own the means of production only have those means of production so they can make money off them, not to produce food that people need to survive, then you have a situation where you make some pretty shit calls in terms of efficiency, and you make some pretty shit calls in terms of distribution as well. And so like when someone says, see this as a means of production, it's not always about like, oh, this is producing a hierarchical society, and so that's a shit go. It's actually about democratizing the means of production. At the moment, we have people, usually a small number of people, that control something as important as food production. And so like, they have the final say. So if the system is designed and it benefits them, let me just say that again, it benefits them to waste $218 billion a year, usually the one argument that people have about capitalism being amazing is it's the most efficient. But like, you know, if you're wasting stuff and it's still profitable, you have to ask yourself at some point along the line, is that actually the best way of doing that? Especially in the face of like the knowledge we have nowadays about like environmental destruction and like the way that we're like, you know, exhausting basically the planet's resources and stuff like that. And like, you know, the way that we also produce food and stuff like that through, you know, industrial chemicals, is like, you know, kind of poisoning us and causing us other problems. So are there more ethical ways to make food? And like, if profit comes first over ethical food production, maybe we're never going to solve some other problems when it comes to our health generally, because we're happy to have mass-produced and fast food options as opposed to more healthy options. But like, if private interests control that for profit, you're never going to have that conversation properly. But like, if you seize the means of production, and this is the core element of seizing the means of production here. Now, in a Marxist sense, seizing the means of production would be all of the people that work in food production, so that work in those factories, work in any business that's associated with food production, and anyone that works on the farmland, like any of the farm hands, any of the people that are associated with dealing, like just working the land. And like, sometimes that might be both. Capitalists might actually work the land too. They might actually work the land. So they're being productive. But like, some capitalists just sit in a mansion somewhere and just like rake in the profits. They don't actually do anything. But like, what seizing the means of production is actually about is the people that work it make the call. Not broader society. So not us, the broad masses, the voting populations out there, but the people that work it, they make the control. They control it and they make the decisions, and they do it democratically. One of the core values of our society at the moment is this love of democracy, because we think that it might not be as efficient all the time, but at least everybody gets a say or some type of representation in that system. So the idea of seizing the means of production is actually about bringing democracy to a place in society which it's been locked out of. It hasn't been locked out of our political systems. We vote. You could argue if we're really democratic or not. That's an argument for another day. But like, we vote in our political system, but we don't vote economically. That's all held by boards of directors and business owners. They run those things like a king or a monarch would have, or some type of autocrat or an authoritarian or a totalitarian. They have control over their entire system. And like, you know, if they make poor business decisions and crash the economy, well, that was the risk that you get from a private institution. Now, I'm not saying that people that democratically run parts of the economy won't crash the businesses and stuff like that, but they'll be making democratic decisions. And if they make decisions, it might not just be about the profit. It might be about, hey, we have the knowledge of running this industry because we do the work. We know how it works. We could make this more efficient. Or we could stop wasting $218 billion a year on this food over here. It might not be profitable, but who gives a shit? We're wasting all of this food. And so like, seizing the means of production still leaves a lot of question marks. All right. It's not a solution to all of our problems. It's not a solution to all of our problems, but it is supposed to take a very, I would say, heinous and potentially nefarious problem in our current system, which is, one, it's done for private interests. And so if it's profitable for them to waste and allow people to die or allow people to suffer, and it's profitable, they'll do it. And like, democratizing the economy, which is what seizing the means of production is about, is an option that I think we should potentially be exploring, if not just going straight for it, because we've had enough time in the sun with private ownership of the means of production under capitalism.